Hey you guys, I'm Marc Silber. I'm a published photographer here in Carmel, California, and today I'm going to teach you about the power of visualization. So what we're going to talk about today is visualization, which if you've been following my video series, you know that I ask a lot of photographers what visualization means to them and why it's so important. Visualization is the first and most important part of the whole cycle of photography. Why is it so important? Well, to answer that question, let's take a look at what visualization means. It means being able to see in your mind's eye what's going to happen with a photograph before you press the shutter. What kind of trick is that, Mark? Well, it's an interesting trick. It means that you have to develop your ability to see visually and think about it before you press the shutter. Now that can happen in a split second, or it can happen over a period of time, and we're going to talk about different examples of each of those things. Visualization means you're photographing with purpose and intention. Can you remember a time where you really visualized a photograph before you pressed the shutter? And compare that to a time where you were maybe just being a tourist and just pressing the shutter as a snapshot. Big difference. In fact, this is what Ansel Adams said. The whole key to a photograph is that you visualize it before you press the shutter. Now, visualization can encompass all sorts of things. It can encompass what camera you're using, what lens you're using, what aperture you're using. Do you want a shallow depth of field, or do you want a wide depth of field? Or do you want it as a black and white for that matter, or in color? There's all those parameters come into how you visualize something. So Minor White said, who was contemporary with Ansel Adams, one should not only photograph for what things are, but for what else they are. What did he mean by that, what else they are? Well, the best example I know is Edward Weston, who you may have seen in my interviews with his grandson. In fact, I'm going to play you this little section of me talking with his grandson Kim about how Edward was able to capture everyday objects and make them look gorgeous. Kim, I want to ask you something about, I know he said there were no rules to composition.
Right.
But nonetheless, he had this uncanny ability to take everyday objects, like we see pepper number 30,
Right.
and bring the beauty out.
Yeah.
The most famous one to me is the toilet in Mexico.
Right. That is
It's
a
like,
great
who
image
takes a picture of
of
a
a
toilet,
toilet,
right? And makes
yeah.
it look beautiful.
Yeah.
But, okay, so even though he didn't have rules, was there a philosophy?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think any artist, I call it their voice. It's a language they're speaking.
Exactly.
Even though it's a photographic language. And you not necessarily train yourself, but he was so precise on how he framed something.
Okay.
It was pleasing to him. I mean, and he was a master at composition.
Absolutely.
And that was something you gained from working as long as he did.
Mm-hmm. Weston visualized these things like pepper number 30. Well, there were 29 different peppers before he got to that one, and he had a direct vision of what he wanted. It took him that many different examples and exposures until he ended up with what he wanted. Pretty remarkable. If you want to check out Weston, look at some of my other videos. He's a remarkable photographer. What about a modern photographer talking about visualization? Well, one photographer I interviewed several times is Chase Jarvis, who you may know is also not only an amazing photographer, but the CEO of Creative Live, and they have all sorts of amazing videos that you probably have seen. So let's hear how Chase approaches a shoot, especially in terms of visualization.
The first thing is I look at the scene without the camera. I walk around without the camera pressed to my face, because when you put the camera to your face, you see a lot less than you do just walking around. So I'm going to walk the area that I'm going to shoot without the camera to my face and look for interesting things. When I find things I'm going to shoot, or I can build a scene in my mind, then I'll start putting the pieces together, and that's kind of a visualization for me. So when I'm visualizing, I know exactly how I want this thing to look. I know I want this edge of the frame to be next to this tree, and I want my subject running or jumping into this part of the frame. And I even actually pre-visualize all the way to what this could look like in post-production. But suffice to say, I kind of visualize the shot, and then next, I fantasize about it a little bit. What could I put in here to make this the absolute best picture?
So Chase talked about going to a scene and going around the scene without even having a camera pressed to his face. That's actually really important because the camera right there is going to limit your vision. So you go to an area you're going to photograph, like right here. And what I actually like to do to help the visualization is I either use, I used to recommend a card, but you've got these with you all the time, why not use them? You can either use it like this to simulate a frame, or even like this, a rectangle. But I usually just go like this, and I look at the scene in terms of what shots might be present. And it's kind of a game of, you can walk into a space and feel like there's an amazing photograph there somewhere. You just have to find it. And using your fingers like this does help your visualization process because you're putting a frame on it. And I recommend this as an exercise that you can do anywhere. You're waiting for a subway, or you're talking to somebody on the phone and maybe you're getting a little bored. Well, just pull out your fingers and visualize, look for photographs. Look for something that would be visually interesting within that frame. And that's going to strengthen your ability to visualize. But that's really important. You go to any new scene, you should look it over because you may find something that's completely unexpected. My son actually told me a story about being on a shoot recently with Annie Leibovitz. And she came to photograph his company. And he said, she spent the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes with no camera at all, walking around just looking at what was visually interesting, looking at the people, looking at their faces. So she had all that in her kind of her memory store to work with in terms of visualization. That's a really, really good tip. Another example of visualization is when you go out and you're traveling, it's a good idea to write down those shots that you definitely want to come back with. Here's an example. And the thing is, a lot of times you're traveling to an area like Paris, you want to come back with a picture of the Eiffel Tower. But how do you do that without it being a cliche? So there's where the visualization comes in. And in this photograph that you can see here, instead of just shooting the classic postcard photograph of the Eiffel Tower, I shot it looking up and I turned it into a black and white. But that was a point that I visualized because I wanted to come back with that photograph, but I wanted to have some twist on it. And when I come back from trips, I always do make a note of all those classic photographs that I want. I went to the Matterhorn, and I kind of visualized what I wanted, but when I got there, I saw the clouds and the birds, and boom, that was the photograph I was looking for. You can see these are just a few examples of visualization, and actually there's a whole lot more. That's why I want to make sure you do subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any of these, because I'm going to keep rolling out examples for you about how to visualize, how to strengthen your visualization, and examples of other photographers using their visualization. It means so much to have you join me. I really appreciate your feedback, so leave your comments down here. I've already told you to subscribe, but if you haven't done that yet, make sure you do that. Definitely go ahead and like and share this video. My goal is to help you advance as a photographer and continue to grow and expand in your ability to communicate. So until next time, remember to get out and capture your own images of life.